In 11 days, America will elect its next president. While past elections embrace the peaceful transfer of power, election conspiracies threaten the 2020 election, and experts warn of similar dangers in 2024. Former President Trump, along with his allies, have spread false claims that are undermining our election process. Claims come in various forms, including votes being cast by dead voters and undocumented immigrants. Despite rigorous fact-checking, these claims are prominent in our national discourse. But how did we get here? What can we do to protect our elections and reassure people the process is fair and legal? We're joined now in studio on the desk by Julian Labar, an assistant political science professor at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So how do you feel about these false claims gaining traction?
Yeah, I think, some of those false claims are bound to sort of spread in the population for a whole range of reasons, ranging from psychological factors, from factors related to the platforms that they're circulating on. But generally speaking, I think that as human beings, we're all wired to sort of be more receptive to stuff that we want to hear as opposed to the stuff that we probably should hear.
Yeah.
So I think, this is bound to happen. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do about it.
Right. Social media plays a role in this, right, where we end up hearing things that we want to hear, things that we click on, we get more of that.
Absolutely. And, social media really help the spread of those kinds of stories. There's studies that have shown that false stories travel faster, they travel further than they would otherwise offline, but also faster and further than true stories.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. The other thing that I've studied recently, that I've published with a few of my co-authors, is that not all social media are equally problematic when it comes to disinformation. And we talk a lot about TikTok, we talk a lot about X, but actually in some of my research, what we've shown is that the platforms where you actually are connected with people in real life, offline, are actually the worst ones.
Interesting.
Why? Because the people that you trust them. And so you might actually accept false information more easily than you would from
Facebook
strangers.
falls into that category,
Absolutely.
right? And really in the last couple of elections, that was an issue, wasn't it? You talk about this concept called epistemic vulnerability. What is that?
Yeah, epistemic vulnerability is looking at the crisis of information, but looking beyond just falsehoods. Since 2016, we've all been very concerned about deception and people believing in falsehoods. But the reality is that our crisis of information is much broader than that. First of all, some people believe they're never exposed to disinformation, and we don't know that they're not. Some people feel that they're relatively sheltered from it because they think they can see through it, that they can't be fooled. But the reality is that most of us cannot recognize it.
Yeah.
But beyond just exposure to disinformation and belief in disinformation, we have problems of trust in the media. We have people who can't recognize what's true and what's false anymore. We have people who are starting to become paranoid about information and start to question even the stuff that they should believe in because it's true.
Right.
And so I've tried to study the crisis of information, taking into account this whole breadth of problems rather than just falsehoods.
As much research as you've done on this, what do you think the media can do to make things more clear for the public?
Well, there are several things. The United States is really peculiar in terms of its media system for several reasons. First, we're extremely polarized, and I think it's become a sort of business model for media to fuel this sort of partisan animosity we have in this country. And what I've shown in some of my research is that the more we fuel this partisan hostility that we have in this country, the more people will be suspicious about information. The second thing has to do more with how we fund our media system in general. In my research, what I show is that in the United States, in 2018, the data are a little bit old, but in 2018, the United States spent $1.36 per capita to fund public media. Other countries like Germany were spending $116 per capita. And the reality is that when you have a strong public media system, journalists like you can actually do their jobs and not tell people what they want to hear, but what they should hear. And I think this is a real growth edge for the United States.
Yeah, and there are some politicians that want to take away even that little bit of funding from public media. When reading the news, this is just in our final 30 seconds here, just as kind of a tip to people who are out there getting bombarded with a lot of information, what red flags should people look out for?
Yeah, the first thing to look out for, especially online, is there's a lot of clickbait. And a lot of people just look at the headline and they don't actually look at the story behind it. The thing is, if you actually click on the headlines, you'll fall on a web page that may look a little bit suspicious. People should look at the domain extension. Is it .com? Is it something fishier? People should look for whether there are sources, whether there are quotes in the article. And if something sounds a little bit too sensationalist, a little bit too big to be true, try to cross-reference, right? Try to see if there is a reputable source that has actually covered the same story.
Right. Check your sources. Yeah, that's going to be the name of my band when I start one of these days. Julian, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.